Welcome to our deep dive into the really captivating history of psychology. We're going to be exploring a dense handbook, extracting key insights and milestones so you can get a solid grasp of how the field has evolved.
Yeah, and
Oh, and along the way, we'll unearth some surprising facts and try to connect those to current trends.
right.
So it'll be a fun and insightful exploration for anyone who is curious about psychology's origins or just wants a little refresher.
Yeah. It's amazing to think how psychology evolved from just philosophical inquiry into a multifaceted scientific field. So we'll trace this evolution, uncovering the pioneers behind it, the groundbreaking ideas, and the shifts in perspective that have shaped our understanding of the human mind and behavior.
That's right. Let's begin at the very beginning. Where did psychology as a distinct science first take root?
Well, while the human mind has been a topic of fascination for centuries, psychology as a formal discipline really emerged in the late 19th century. And before that, explorations of the mind were largely intertwined with philosophy. But around this time, a crucial shift occurred, emphasizing empirical investigation and controlled experiments.
That makes sense. Science was flourishing in so many areas during that time. So, who were some of the key figures who spearheaded this transition to a more scientific approach?
One name that stands out is Wilhelm Wundt. In 1879, he established the first experimental psychology lab, which was a pivotal moment that's often considered the birth of psychology as we know it.
Wow. It's remarkable how a single lab could have such a huge impact. What made Wundt's approach so groundbreaking?
Well, Wundt sought to study the mind using methods similar to those used in the natural sciences. He focused on introspection, which involved training individuals to carefully observe and report their own thoughts and feelings. His aim was to measure mental events with the same precision as physical phenomena.
That sounds incredibly challenging. How do they even begin to interpret the results of such subjective experiences?
Right. Well, introspection definitely had its limitations, but Wundt's rigorous approach laid the foundation for experimental methodology in psychology. And this emphasis on controlled observation and systematic data collection continues to be a cornerstone of psychological research today.
So Wundt kind of set the stage, and then things start to branch out. Can you walk me through some of the early schools of thought that emerged in psychology?
Certainly. In the early 20th century, we see the rise of distinct schools, each offering a unique perspective on how to study the mind. One early school was structuralism, which was championed by Edward B. Titchener.
Okay.
He aimed to break down mental processes into their basic components, much like a chemist analyzing the elements of a compound.
Right.
He believed that by understanding these fundamental elements, we could gain a clearer picture of the structure of the mind.
So it was all about identifying the building blocks of consciousness, like sensations, feelings, and images. What about functionalism? I know that was another really influential school of thought around this time.
Exactly. Functionalism, heavily influenced by William James, shifted the focus from the structure of the mind to its function.
Okay.
Instead of asking, what is the mind made of? Functionalists asked, what does the mind do, and how does it help us adapt to our environment? They were interested in the purpose of mental processes and how they contribute to our survival and well-being.
That seems like a more practical approach, focusing on how our minds help us navigate the world.
Precisely. And this shift in emphasis from the what to the how and why set the stage for many later developments in psychology, particularly in areas like evolutionary psychology and cognitive psychology.
Hmm. It's fascinating how these early schools of thought laid the groundwork for our current understanding. Now, I know there was a significant turn towards behaviorism. Can you tell me more about how this perspective challenged the existing schools of thought?
Certainly. As psychology continued to evolve, a new perspective emerged that would fundamentally redefine the field for a time. This was behaviorism, and it boldly rejected the focus on internal mental states that characterized both structuralism and functionalism.
It almost sounds like a complete rebellion against the previous ways of thinking. Why did behaviorists reject the study of the mind?
Well, behaviorists, led by figures like John B. Watson, argued that psychology should focus solely on observable behavior rather than on subjective mental experiences. They believed that introspection was unreliable and that the mind was a black box that could not be studied scientifically.
So instead of trying to understand thoughts and feelings, behaviorists concentrated on studying how people and animals react to stimuli in their environment.
Exactly. They believed that all behavior could be explained through learning and conditioning. One of the most famous and controversial examples of this approach is Watson's Little Albert experiment.
Wasn't that the experiment where they conditioned a baby to fear a white rat?
Yes. Although considered ethically questionable by today's standards, this experiment demonstrated how fear could be learned through a process called classical conditioning.
It's amazing how behaviorism took center stage in psychology for a while. What were some of the key figures and ideas that shaped this school of thought?
Well, John B. Watson, as we mentioned, played a pivotal role in establishing behaviorism. He argued that psychology should be the science of behavior, not the mind. His work was further developed by B.F. Skinner, who focused on operant conditioning.
I remember learning about Skinner's work with pigeons and rats. Didn't he show that behaviors are shaped by their consequences?
Absolutely. Skinner demonstrated how behavior can be modified through rewards and punishments. This concept, known as reinforcement, became a central tenet of behaviorism and continues to influence our understanding of learning and motivation today.
Wow.
His work had a massive impact on learning theories and is still applied in various settings, from classrooms to workplaces.
It's incredible how behaviorism, despite its limitations, provided such valuable insights into how we learn and behave. But I know this isn't the end of the story. Didn't the pendulum eventually swing back toward the study of the mind?
You're right. As we'll see next, the mind was due for a dramatic comeback with the emergence of cognitive psychology. But first, let's take a moment to reflect on these early schools of thought and their lasting impact on the field.
So we've seen how behaviorism redefined psychology for a period, focusing entirely on observable actions. But then something fascinating happened, like a resurgence of interest in the mind itself. What led to this shift back to mentalism?
You've hit on a pivotal turning point in psychology's journey, the cognitive revolution. By the mid-20th century, limitations in purely behavioral explanations became increasingly apparent.
What kind of limitations? Were there phenomena that behaviorism just couldn't account for?
Precisely. Complex cognitive processes like language, problem-solving, and decision-making were difficult, if not impossible, to explain solely through the lens of stimulus and response.
It seems like reducing those intricate mental activities to simple input-output relationships just wouldn't capture the whole picture.
Exactly. Imagine trying to comprehend a masterful painting by simply analyzing the individual brushstrokes. You would miss the composition, the interplay of colors, the overall meaning that emerges from the artist's technique.
So just like a painting is more than the sum of its brushstrokes, the human mind is more than a collection of conditioned responses.
That's a great analogy. And around this time, a new and powerful metaphor emerged that would profoundly shape the cognitive revolution: the computer.
Ah, the dawn of the computer age. How did that influence thinking about the mind?
The development of computer science provided a compelling model for understanding mental processes. Psychologists began to think of the mind as an information processor, much like a computer, capable of receiving input, processing it, storing information, and generating output.
It seems like a natural connection to make, especially with computers becoming increasingly sophisticated at the time.
Yes, and this analogy opened up entirely new avenues for research. Psychologists could now investigate mental processes like memory, attention, perception, and language using experimental methods inspired by computer science.
This is where figures like Noam Chomsky come in, right? I know he was a major critic of behaviorism's account of language acquisition.
Absolutely. Chomsky, a linguist, argued that children's ability to learn language so rapidly and creatively could not be adequately explained by simple learning principles. He proposed that humans possess an innate language faculty, a sort of pre-programmed capacity for acquiring language.
So our brains aren't just blank slates waiting to be written on by experience. We come equipped with a specific mental toolkit for language.
Precisely. Chomsky's work had a profound impact on psychology, demonstrating the power of studying the mind's internal structures and processes.
It's fascinating how the cognitive revolution brought the mind back to the forefront of psychology. But I'm curious, with this renewed focus on mental processes, did this lead to new debates about how the mind works?
It certainly did. One particularly intriguing debate that emerged during this time was between symbolic AI and connectionism.
Okay, break that down for me. What are symbolic AI and connectionism, and why were they at odds?
Think of it this way. Symbolic AI proponents view the mind as a system that manipulates symbols according to rules, much like a computer program. Connectionists, on the other hand, argue that the mind is more like a network of interconnected nodes, similar to the structure of the brain, where information is processed in a distributed and parallel manner.
So symbolic AI sees the mind as a logical, rule-based system, while connectionism emphasizes the interconnectedness and complexity of the brain.
That's a great summary. And this debate continues to this day, with researchers exploring both approaches to understand how the mind processes information, learns, and generates behavior.
It's amazing to see how this computer metaphor, which fueled the cognitive revolution, also spawned these ongoing debates about the nature of the mind. So, while these theoretical debates were unfolding, what was happening on the applied side of psychology? Were there any parallel developments in how psychological knowledge was being used in real-world settings?
Absolutely. While the theoretical landscape was shifting dramatically, the practical application of psychology was also evolving rapidly. In fact, the development of applied psychology runs parallel to these theoretical shifts, with both influencing each other in fascinating ways.
It makes sense that as our understanding of the mind deepens, we'd find new ways to apply that knowledge to solve real-world problems. So where did applied psychology first take root?
It's fascinating to see how early psychologists recognized the practical potential of their field. Back in 1896, Leitner Whitmer established the first psychological clinic focused on helping children with learning difficulties.
That's remarkably early. What kind of help were they providing back then?
Whitmer's clinic focused on assessing and treating children with various educational challenges. This pioneering work laid the foundation for what would become the fields of clinical and school psychology.
So from the very beginning, there was this drive to use psychology to address practical problems and improve people's lives.
Precisely. And this drive led to the emergence of various assessment tools, with intelligence testing being a prime example.
I've always been intrigued by the idea of intelligence testing. Where did that begin?
Well, in the early 20th century, Alfred Binet and Theodore Simon developed the Binet-Simon scale in France. Their goal was to identify students who might need additional educational support.
So rather than focusing on ranking children based on intelligence, they were more interested in finding ways to help those who were struggling.
Exactly. And this scale eventually led to the development of the Stanford Binet test in the United States, which became one of the most widely used intelligence tests.
I know there's been a lot of debate about intelligence testing over the years, and Stanford Binet has certainly evolved since its early days.
You're right. The history of intelligence testing is complex and raises important questions about how we measure and understand intelligence. But the development of these tests, despite their limitations, highlights a key trend in applied psychology: the quest to quantify and measure psychological constructs.
It seems like there's this inherent desire in science to measure and categorize things, even something as elusive as intelligence.
That's a keen observation. And this drive to quantify extended to other areas as well. For instance, personality testing emerged in the early 20th century, initially less structured than intelligence tests, but gradually adopting a more quantifiable format.
So we see this parallel evolution of both theory and practice in psychology. And just like major historical events shaped the field's theoretical direction, they also influenced its applications. Didn't both world wars have a significant impact on the development of applied psychology?
You're absolutely right. Major global events often serve as catalysts for scientific and technological advancement, and psychology is no exception. Both World War I and World War II played pivotal roles in shaping the trajectory of applied psychology.
It's a bittersweet reality how wartime often accelerates progress, driven by necessity and a desire to address the human toll of conflict. So how did World War I specifically influence the field?
World War I saw the widespread use of intelligence tests for soldier assessment. This was driven by the need to evaluate recruits and assign them to roles that best suited their abilities.
So the war effort created a demand for psychological expertise in areas like personnel selection and training.
Precisely. And this laid the groundwork for the later application of intelligence tests in various settings, including education, industry, and clinical practice.
I imagine World War II, with its even greater scale and intensity, had an even more profound impact on the field.
Yes, World War II had a profound and multifaceted impact on psychology, particularly in the area of clinical psychology. The need to treat soldiers suffering from trauma, shell shock, and other psychological conditions led to a surge in demand for mental health professionals.
It's tragic, but often those difficult circumstances force us to confront issues we might otherwise have ignored or downplayed.
That's a thoughtful point. And this increased demand for mental health services during the war had a lasting impact. It led to the expansion of training programs for clinical psychologists and contributed to the recognition of clinical psychology as a distinct and crucial specialization.
So the war, while devastating, also brought about positive changes in the field of mental health care.
It did. The war effort also spurred advancements in other areas, like personnel selection, training, and the development of techniques to boost morale and resilience among soldiers.
It seems like every major historical event leaves its mark on the development of psychology, both in terms of theory and application. So, as the 20th century progressed, did applied psychology continue to branch out into new and specialized areas?
Absolutely. The post-war years witnessed an explosion of specialization within psychology. Driven by both societal needs and the increasing complexity of the field, new subfields emerged to address specific challenges and areas of study.
What were some of the most notable areas of specialization that arose during this period?
We saw the rise of subfields like community psychology, focused on understanding and addressing social problems, health psychology, which explores the connections between psychological factors and physical health, forensic psychology, applying psychological principles to legal issues, and the psychology of women and gender, challenging traditional gender roles and biases.
It's like psychology was becoming increasingly intertwined with every aspect of human experience, from our individual well-being to our social interactions and the larger systems that shape our lives.
That's a great way to put it. And as the field continued to expand, there was a growing recognition of the ethical and societal implications of psychological research and practice.
That makes sense. As our understanding of the human mind grew, so did our awareness of the potential for both positive and negative applications of that knowledge.
Exactly. And this awareness led to the establishment of professional organizations and ethical guidelines to ensure responsible research and practice. It was a crucial step in the maturation of the field, recognizing its power and responsibility.
So by the late 20th century, psychology had transformed from a fledgling science to a diverse and influential field with applications spanning a wide range of human endeavors. It's truly remarkable to see how far it's come. But where does this leave us now? What does the future hold for psychology?
That's the question that continues to intrigue psychologists and those curious about the human mind. As we enter the 21st century, the possibilities for psychology seem boundless.
It's incredible to think about how much ground we've covered, tracing psychology's journey, from its philosophical roots to its current standing as this diverse and influential field.
Yeah. What strikes me most is how psychology's evolution reflects this continuous interplay between theory, application, and the broader social context. It's a testament to the dynamic nature of knowledge, always adapting to new challenges and opportunities.
So after this deep dive into the past, what insights can we glean about the future of psychology? Where might this field be headed?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
If we consider the broader historical trends, some really fascinating possibilities emerge. I mean, we've witnessed a surge in specialization with psychology branching out into numerous subfields.
Right.
But could there be a counter-movement towards greater integration and interdisciplinarity?
That's a really interesting thought. Psychology already intersects with so many other fields like neuroscience, biology, computer science, sociology, even the arts.
Yeah.
The potential for collaboration seems huge.
Exactly. And as those fields advance, we can expect psychology to engage with them in even more profound ways.
Right.
For example, the increasing sophistication of brain imaging techniques offers unprecedented opportunities to unravel the neural underpinnings of thoughts, emotions, and behaviors.
Yeah, it's almost mind-boggling to imagine what we might uncover. And with the rise of AI, we're encountering new questions about the nature of intelligence, consciousness, and what it means to be human.
Those are some profound questions, and psychology is well positioned to contribute to these discussions. But it's not just about technology.
Right.
The pressing issues of the 21st century, like climate change, social inequality, political polarization, all demand psychological insights.
It seems like we need a deeper understanding of human behavior and motivation now more than ever if we're going to address these global challenges effectively.
I agree. Can psychology move beyond the individual level and contribute to solutions for these complex societal problems? This is both a challenge and a tremendous opportunity for the field. For instance, insights from behavioral economics and social psychology could inform policies aimed at promoting sustainable practices or reducing prejudice and discrimination.
It's inspiring to think about how psychology can be a force for positive change in the world. As we wrap up this deep dive, what stands out to you as the most significant takeaway?
For me, it's the realization that psychology, despite its scientific rigor, is fundamentally a human endeavor. It's shaped by the questions we ask, the methods we use, and the values we hold. As we continue to explore the human mind and behavior, we must remain mindful of these influences and strive for ethical and responsible applications of our knowledge.
Beautifully put.
It's a reminder that understanding the human mind is a journey that never truly ends. There's always more to discover, more to learn, more to ponder. So, to our listeners, I encourage you to continue exploring this fascinating field. Who knows, maybe one of you will be part of writing the next chapter in Psychology's story.